Good evening. We'll begin in just a second. Okay. This shiur is dedicated as a schus for Refuah Shlema for Chana Sarlea Bas Mמציא, Shetihya, Refuah Shlema Toch Chol Yisrael. The truth is, it's not just that it's being dedicated as a schus to Refuah of this woman, but it's really more than that. When a relative of hers, a good friend of mine, asked me today to daven for her, which I did promptly, it sparked a stream of thoughts that really created this shiur. So it's really a schus for her, as everything that I'm going to say tonight is cobbled together from a flood of thoughts that were generated after I davened for her. So I turned my thoughts to the parasha. So we're davening for Refuah. And in this week's parasha, we have the Eser Makkos. And Chazal tell us an interesting thing, that all the Makkos were negoif Mitzrayim v'refuah liyisrael. The words of Chazal, right? That it was indeed an affliction, right, on Mitzrayim, but it was a healing, a spiritual healing to Am Yisrael. So every Makkah that they got was a healing for us, right? Which sounds like almost a contradiction. If it's something painful, it should hurt. If it's something pleasurable, it should be pleasurable to all. Right? And it wasn't that way. This very same spiritual energy that brought this affliction and suffering on Egypt brought refuah to Am Yisrael. So now we find that this is a trend that probably has repeated itself many times in history, but it is certainly going to happen in the future. And that is that Asira Koshku Lotzi Chama Min Artika Chazan, a few places say that Hashem is destined to take the sun out of its sheath and expose special inner rays, spiritual side of the sun. Tzadikim misrapim ba v'roshoim nidonim ba. The tzadikim will be healed by these great rays, right? It'll be a healing, but the Rishayim will be vaporized by them. They'll be totally consumed. So you could have, tzaddikim and Rishayim, for lack of a better way of describing it, tanning at the same beach at the same time, basking in the same rays. And these same rays, that are going to vaporize the Rishayim are going to give refuah to the tzaddikim. March the same trend, as happened in Mitzrayim. It's din and it's makkah and it's nagifa for the evil, and it's a refuah for the tzaddikim. So, I want to unpack this and explain this well, but I want to go layer by layer. So first, it seems like almost an absurdity. Just let's talk about it in terms of, is it pain or is it pleasure? Is it good or is it bad? Are these rays, are these energies? If you think if it's a makkah, you just want to save the tzaddik from it, not expose him to it, right? And if it's a refuah, then showing before the tzaddik, and I've already say it's the same energies at the same time to a tzaddik in Russia, and the Russia is afflicted by it or destroyed by it even, and the tzaddik is healed, right? It gets reinforced. So speaking in more general terms without getting into refuah per se, which is what I want to add. But, are these rays good or are they bad? Right? Are they a form of pain or are they a form of pleasure and benefit? So the Ramchal in his Sefer Derech Eitz Chaim addresses this issue. He frames it in a different. He doesn't address these particular, chazals that we quoted, be it from this week's parsha of Negof Mitzrayim Refuah Yisrael, be it all these Gemaras and Midrashim that talk about the future of Hakadosh Motzi Chamin Artika, Tzadikim Misrapim Ba, V'Roshoim Nidonim Ba. He just asks a more general question. Hashem is only good, only wants to do good. He created the world to be mative. So where does this suffering come from? Even if it's to punish those who deserve it, but where does it come from if his whole Ratzon is just to be mative? So he says a very interesting idea. But I'm not going to use his metaphor. I'm going to use a metaphor of my own to explain. You take an oven and you'll crank it up on high, right? Highest heat. You're going to put in the oven 3 things at the same time. You're going to put in an ice block. You're going to put in a cake batter. One of these soft cake batters, these instant cakes, like a brownie mix as an example. And you're going to put a piece of paper. Okay? So they're all in the same oven at the same time. Right? So the ice block melts, but on the other hand, the liquidy cake batter goes hard, and the paper catches fire. A schizophrenic oven. It's all these 3 things were in the same oven at the same time, being exposed to the same heat. So what's the answer? Now, of course, the oven's just doing its thing of giving off heat, of course, right? But the heat interacts differently with the different recipients. When ice is exposed to heat, it melts. When a cake batter is exposed to heat, it hardens and rises, right? When thin paper is exposed to heat, it ignites, right? So the shinui is in the makablin, right? The difference is in the recipients, right? But the mashpia, the giver, is doing its one thing. So says the Ramchal, right? Although he gave a different mashal than the one I gave. The Ramchal says like this: the Rebbe Hashem is only being mative. He's only making the world a better place. Being mative means to make things good. Now, a tzaddik is a good guy, and he contributes to the goodness of the world. So the energy of goodness reinforces him, right? Right. Now, the Rasha, by the wicked person, by positioning himself as a bad guy that does bad, so he contaminates himself, but also to keep him around is to the detriment of the world. So good energy, when it interacts with the Rasha, neutralizes him. So Hashem only does the good, but by the tzaddik, to do the good means to reinforce his existence, right? By a Rasha, to do good is to negate his existence, but it's all just being mashpia goodness. But the goodness interacts with the tzaddik by reinforcing him, right? And, building him up, and by the Rasha, goodness interacts with the evil by neutralizing. Goodness neutralizes evil. And the difference is not in God, the difference is in the recipients, right? It's a very, very important point. But it's a very necessary step, but it deals with it on a very basic, elemental level of good versus evil, right? And how pure goodness interacts with the good and evil differently, and the difference is in the recipients, not in the one bestowing goodness. All right, but I want to deal more with refuah per se. Right? Refuah is a form of goodness. I want to deal with like refuah itself, right? Because that's Lush of Chazal, that said that I was a refuah li Yisrael. Right? Talk about refuah. right? Not just hatava, not just goodness, but refuah, a healing. I wanted to discuss this at added level on top of what the Ramchal said on the base level. Discuss healing per se. And B'ezras Hashem, as I darshan on this, I hope it'll just be mamshech refuahs to all that needed. Ken Yerotzen. So there's a very interesting chazal, right? We daven for refuah every day, 3 times a day in Shemona Esrei. I think it's Gemara in Megillah, Daf Yud Zayin and Beis, that this goes through the structure of the Shemona Esrei, and the bracha of Refuah, right, is the 8th bracha of the 19 brachas that we say in what we call Shemona Esrei, because originally it was 18. They added the 19th later because of the minim, right? Our oppressors, right? So, but the 8th bracha is Refuah, and the Gemara explains because we need refuah for bris milah. You have bris milah, you got to recover for it, right? Got to recover from bris milah. It's a surgical procedure. So since bris milah is on the 8th day, and that's not just a side thing. We have find through our chazal the fact that the bris milah is on the 8th day is something that has to do with bris milah inherently. It's not an accompanying condition, so it has to do with the essence of bris milah. Right? So we find that throughout chazal that 8th, is lamratzeach al shminis. It alludes to bris milah. Right? So refuah is the 8th bracha because it's for bris milah. So now work the equation the other way. So it's for bris milah. It's not just for any type of ailment. Meaning, it's in the schus of bris milah that we have refuah. And now, once we have refuah in the world, right? So we could use it, apply it to all ailments. But it sounds like, think about this logically. If refuah is for bris milah, it means if there wouldn't be bris milah, there wouldn't be refuah either. It's for bris milah. Now, once we have refuah for bris milah, right, we can extend it to all our ailments. It's an amazing thing to think about, right? Why that that refuah is in the schus of bris milah, and what bris milah represents, which once we get to what bris milah represents, we could, once we abstract it, we could extend it to a few other things, as we will do. So think about what refuah is and think about what bris milah is. Is there a common denominator? Right? Most definitely. It's most definitely a common denominator. Well, first of all, bris milah is we change ourselves from the way we are naturally. Right? We naturally have an orla, a foreskin, and we're going to explain that, why that is. Right? So we are naturally, created that way, and we alter the way we are created. Right? So we're created with a foreskin, and we cut away at it. It's perfectly naturally part of the body. Right? It is cut away. And it is natural to be an orel. It is artificial to be a mohu, right? Because that's what we do. That's how we change ourselves. Okay? So now think about refuah. Right? Everything physical is just a ticking time bomb. Everything just from the time it comes into existence. Its lifespan is ticking away. Right? And this is true of anything physical. Right? Not just the human body. We experience aging, and with aging comes, of course, infirmities. Get sick, and you eventually die. Right? Hopefully, after a very long life, very, very long and healthy life, but doesn't always work that way, and generally, and even after a long life, there's degeneration. And it's the old guy generally gets sick before they That's the decline, right? But lahavdil, it's also not just by biological entities, right? But this is true of anything physical. Everything wears out, right? Machines, furniture, nothing lasts forever, right? Things go towards the degeneration. They have their lifespan, right? For lack of a better word, to apply that to all entities, all physical entities. They're at the height of their lifespan at the time that they're new or first born, and then that gets depleted, until but not just depleted, but there's a degeneration. It's like everything starts getting old, gets rusty, gets dilapidated until it's totally broken. It's all physical things are that way. That's the way of nature. Nothing lasts, right? All right. So you would think about this for a second. That okay, if something got sick, right? That's just hastening the inevitable degeneration. You would think. Refuah is like bounce back, rejuvenation, regrowth. That's amazing. Right? It goes counter the trend. Everything is headed towards degeneration. Everything's called in physics entropy. The things are the most controlled, the most, and then it moves towards, scattering, disillusion, things start falling apart, right? So refuah goes against that trend. You would think everything's anyway headed that way towards, falling apart. And, and if Asher person got sick, that would just accelerate, the decline that is inevitable, and then refuah's bounce back. It's counter the trend of where everything is headed. Amazing. It's regeneration. Even though overall everything's moving to deterioration, refuah is regeneration. It's counter nature. It's an amazing thing. So just like bris milah, we change our nature, right? So in that merit, Hashem gives refuah to the world, right? Pushes against the natural deterioration, the head there that's built into teva. So amazing thing to think about. So you can understand that that if it's supposed that we do bris milah, that we change our nature, so the Rebbe gives refuah, right? So now, once we establish that refuah is actually anti-nature, right? So now let's expand this a little bit, right? What is nature? What is nature? Right? So truth is, nature as we know it comes from the chet of Adam Rishon. Right? Beforehand, the world was very different. Biology was different, as we know for sure, because Adam Rishon was built to last. He could have lived forever. If he wouldn't have sinned. On the day you eat from it, you're going to die. I mean, you're going to bring death into the world. He didn't die on that day, but he brought death into the world. Right? He brought death into the world, right? And it changed the whole world. Cosmos changed. And here's an amazing thing, because I'll say that Adam Rishon was nolad mohu. Never, he was born. He didn't have a foreskin, and he was a moshuch bar lasso. After he saw what he became, when he became mortal, as we know mortality. That's what being mortal is, to have mortality. When he brought mortality into the world, he was moshuch bar lasso. He pulled out his foreskin. So the foreskin represents mortality, right? And everything that's wrong with the world after Chet Adam Rishon. Right? So nature, as we know it, is all a product of the sin that gave us that is gave us the foreskin, right? It's represented by the foreskin, right? That nature. Now, nature is what has an heder because of the chet, right? Which produced the foreskin. Bris Milah moves in the reverse direction. So the chet Adam Rishon gave us the orla. Bris Milah is to push back against that and try to get back to something reminiscent of what Adam was before the sin, and that's the destiny of the Jewish people that have Bris Milah. Right? We have this destiny of rectifying the sin of Adam. That from the sin of Adam, by the way, came all the other nations of the world. Right? There would have only been one nation on earth if not for the sin of Adam. And that's alluded to. Mikam Choiso Goy Echad Baaretz. Uma Yechida, we're called the one nation. Right? The one nation that was always meant to be. Right? So sin of Adam gave us all our enemies that we have to contend with. It gave us the decrepit world that we have. It gave us mortality, and Bris Milah is to push back against that, right? And that's what separates us from humanity and gives us a destiny that the rest of humanity doesn't have, a destiny that gets back to Adam Rishon Kodem Chet and even goes past that. Okay, so sickness, is part and parcel of mortality that came into existence with Chet Adam Rishon, right? And it's part and parcel of being a biological unit as we know biology today, which came from Chet Adam Rishon, which is represented by the foreskin, and Bris Milah pushes back against that. Right? So say it like this: the world is sick. In the natural world as it is, mortality is not just a human problem. It's a problem not just in animals, also in other biologicals. It's not just even plants and trees don't live forever. Nothing lasts forever. The head there that came into our because Chet Adam Rishon, that's called natural nature as we know it, even though it wasn't always meant to be this way. And in the future it won't be this way. For us, right, who have Bris Milah, we're going to make it, just so we have Bris Milah given the 8th day, we're going to make it to the Elef Hashmini, the 8th millennium. It's going to be a new world, right? This world of nature will cease to exist. It's going to be a supernatural world, right? A world with different laws, right? That amongst those laws is no death and not even any sickness, right? So everything that's wrong with the world, which is perfectly natural, because it's part and parcel of nature, but that nature came into existence because of the sin of Adam. So everything that's wrong with nature, which is perfectly natural, that's all called sickness, right? But it's counter that. Refuah is what we merit to have because of Bris Milah. We're pushing back against nature, right? So now, this goes lamala that Adam could have not done harm to the world, right? If the world wasn't vulnerable to being harmed, right? If the world was invulnerable and impervious to harm, Adam couldn't have affected it. The world was already in a weakened state that made it susceptible to getting sick. All right. So the pasuk says in Parsha Zinu, right? Ani amisvachaya, right? I make death and I bring back to life, right? Machatzti vani erpa, I smite and I heal. Right? It's a very interesting thing. You see, it set up the equation that death and bring back to life, smite, hit and heal. That healing in itself is runs parallel to bringing back to life. It's like a form of tchias hamesim. It's like we said, it's pushing back against, mortality. It's a pushback against mortality, which is perfectly natural because that's nature as we know it ever since the sin of Adam. But the Sifrei says machatzti, it means to hit, but also means lashon mechitza. I have to heal that wall that I made in reality. And it's, as the Mefarshim explained, what that Sifrei is referring to is on the second day of creation, God created a wall, right, that separated heaven and earth. And from there, that was it facilitated the existence of descent, division, and Gehenna. It's on the Yom Sheni, when he made that Rakia B'soch HaMayim, that's the Mechitza, that the firmament that divides the upper waters from the lower waters. That division, that Mechitza, right, is what makes the world the potential to be sick. Because it cut open creation. That's the gash that could be expanded, right, to become sickness, to even become death, to become everything that the world became. That's like the gash in reality. You're like, you have some fabric, you have a little gash in it, so you could easily expand. It's harder to rip fabric that's never been in any way, torn even a little bit. So it gets exponentially easier, right, to tear something which already has a little tear in it. Once it's a little breach, it's easier to expand that breach. Once there's like that chink in the armor, and that's what the mechitza, the rakia, and Yom HaSheni was. But look how the Rebbe Shalom refers to it: machatzti v'ani erpa. I have to heal that wall, that division that I made in reality. That division, that's the gash that made the world vulnerable to be further ripped apart, right? To give us the natural world that we know today, which is full of elements and full of shortcomings, right? The aspect of mortality that we have in us there's an aspect of it in everything. Nothing's perfect, right? So it's called machatzi v'ani. That the initial division needs to be healed. So you see, the meaning of refuah is to go keneged the teva as we know it, to bring it to a higher place. So it's mamish supernatural. Refuah is something literally supernatural. It really doesn't make sense, because a man can heal, so why should man ever age? Think about it for a second. There is something about refuah that's somal min teva that doesn't fit comfortably with teva, because that same regenerative power that we have to heal should also be anti-aging. Why should you ever age? That same regenerative power, it's something very special that really goes counter the dominant state of nature. And because the dominant state of nature is degeneration, that's why degeneration ultimately wins out. Until Mashiach comes, and after Mashiach, tchia sameis will be la'amavis l'netzach, right? But so right now, refuah is like a little bit of l'mala min hateva, anti-nature injected into nature, right? And the process of getting rid of everything that's wrong is called refuah, right? It's called healing. And once that power is here, and it's in the schus of bris milah, it's for bris milah, and it's in the schus of bris milah. And so once it's here, we could, be zocheh to expand upon it and draw upon it. Chasdei Hashem, Baruch Hashem, right? Big chesed, right? It's counter nature, right? So it could be said that every time we're breaking nature for a positive spiritual achievement, that's called refuah, right? So now the Egyptians, so they're being punished is also a refuah for the world, because they were contributing to the evil, right? Got to get rid of the germs, right? But Am Yisrael now is being elevated to be a spiritual people, as we explained. Now being a spiritual people gives us the legacy of going back to what Adam was before the sin, right? Which is to get out of mortality altogether. That's why it's called refuah, right? But, so of course, we could take it literally that any Jew in Egypt that had any type of infirmity was healed from it. You could take them, that Chazal literally, and as we will understand what Chazal say happens in the future, tzadikim misrapim ba, literally, but this all can be understood by both examples, the Jews in Egypt and what will be in the future, also spiritually, right? To be spiritually elevated, that you push back against mortality. Not just the physical side of mortality, but also that we have all the shortcomings of mortality because of a spiritual shortcoming, because of sin. That's all called refuah. That's all called refuah. All right? And that's the process that Am Yisrael is getting, in their liberation from Mitzrayim, being taken out of Mitzrayim to be taken out of Teva. And that's the secret, that Yetzias had to be bederech nes, miraculous, because it's to take Am Yisrael lamala min hateva. It's to inject them with the ore of Nisim, the koach of Nisim, and that's what real refuah is, to push back against mortality that's natural. You got to get out of the natural. That's why it all had to be benisim, ba'oisais, b'moifsim. All right, and that's what brings real refuah, right? Which is push back against mortality. All right. So now, what else is push back against the root of mortality? The root of mortality is sin, right? What's the pushback to sin? Tshuva, right? Chazal say, Gemara and Yuma, Gedol Tshuva, amongst the things that, the milas of Tshuva is shemevi refuah la'olam. It brings refuah la'olam, right? It brings healing to the world. And now, based on what we're saying, it's very well understood why tshuva brings refuah. Right? Tshuva brings refuah, right? Because refuah is really all about pushing back against mortality, which is the natural, what we call the natural state, but it's really an artificial state created by sin, right? And push back against it, right? Is refuah, and that's what tshuva does. It pushes back against chet, which creates mortality. So since it pushes back against chet, that creates mortality, right? That's why it's maybe refuah la'olam, right? Good. So now, by no coincidence, how does the Navi refer to tshuva? Even in Chumash, what's the synonym for tshuva? Bris milah. Umaltem es orlas levavchem. Cut off the foreskin on your heart, the covering on your heart. Bris milah, ma Hashem Elokecha es levavcha. Right? Over and over again. That bris milah, is the verb of bris used for bris milah is also the same verb umol, right? Milah, right? For tshuva, right? They're parallel concepts, right? And they both have the common denominator of pushing back against mortality, pushing back against what's wrong with the world, even though what's wrong with the world is perfectly natural. That's the world. That's what is. That's natural. Yeah, we don't want natural. We want to push back. We want to transcend nature, and that's called refuah. That's called refuah. And that's why you'll find it's kind of tshuva brings refuah to the world. Bris milah brings refuah, right? And tshuva is referred to, as a form of milah, right? It's all parallel ideas. So, in these parshas, the world is being healed. It's a davar nifla world, the nifla moed, right? The world is being healed. In these parshas, of Shmos ve'Rabo b'shach Yisro mishpatim truma tetzaveh. In the Iber we add truma and tetzaveh. Why? I could just drop a hint, because in the Iber we're also pushing back against another original Gashin reality, which was Miud HaYareach. And we push back against Miud HaYareach in a Shnat HaIbor to equalize the moon and the sun. To explain that, we had a whole shiur from Moshe, longer than an hour on this. I'm not going to get into this right now, but you should know, aside from the mechitza on Yom HaSheni, another thing another original Gashin reality that made the world vulnerable to Chet Adam Rishon was also Miud HaYareach, and we pushed back against that, in a leap year when we equalized the lunar and solar cycles. So that's why in a leap year we have Truma Tetzava also, right? But during these weeks, the universe is being healed, right? Because when there was no Jewish people and no Torah on earth, the universe is going nowhere, right? We were stuck in the mortality box, with all the chisardas. We just stuck in mortality, and the whole world was stuck there. It had no destiny to progress to a higher reality, right? But with an Am Yisrael in the world that has that destiny to break out of mortality, and Am Yisrael, it also benefits the world because this Am Yisrael gets a Torah that comes into the world, and then Trumat Tzava gets a Mishkan that comes into the world, and that changes the world. That changes the world. Now, Agav, I'll explain something else. There's a famous kasha attributed, I meant to say, sorry, it's hours late. There's a famous kasha attributed to Rabbi Chanan. What's the big chesed of tshuva? Consider tshuva a gift from God. It's a gift, right? And no, it's perfectly, God has to play by his own rules. God has to play by his own rules. There's a halacha of toyal rishonos. If a person regrets doing a mitzvah, right? He loses schar for that mitzvah. He will not get paid for a mitzvah he regrets doing, right? He won't get any schar. It's toyal rishonos. So says Rabbi Chanan, God's got to play by his rules. If my regretting a mitzvah strips me of the reward of the mitzvah, right? So my regretting an avera should strip me of the punishment of the avera. God's got to play by his own rules. So it's din. It's not chesed. It's well deserved. Charata anachet, that it should get you out of punishment, right, is perfectly consistent with God's laws. Just like charata on a mitzvah, strips you of any reward for the mitzvah. That is a kasha that everyone said in Rochanan, but he's not the only one who asks it, and probably not the first either. Right? So, like we're saying, kusha mi kara lesa, right? If tshuva only means to get out of punishment, then the kasha is a big kasha. It's not a big chesed, right? But it's not what tshuva is limited to. It's not just to get you out of punishment. And I always illustrate with the following mashal. Right? Let's say a guy comes up to me and says, Yochanan, I am dying of thirst. I need you have a can of soda. Give it to me. Otherwise, I'm gonna drop dead without it. I need it. I'm dying from thirst. All right, I just had, one can of soda already, so it's a spare can of soda. What the heck? Give it to the guy, save his life, right? A few hours later, right, I'm thirsty. And I say, why did I give my can of soda away? Now I'm thirsty. I totally regret giving the can of soda away. Is that guy now going to drop dead, right? Because I regret giving him the can of soda that saved his life. Is he now going to drop dead? No, because I regret, giving him the can of soda, right? That's not going to undo having saved his life. It's just going to say, if you regret it, then you don't deserve the reward. Okay, I lost the reward, but I didn't lose the accomplishment. Tshuva doesn't just get you out of the punishment because you regret it. Tshuva changes reality. The sin is uprooted, right? And that's a major chesed. The koach of tshuva uproots the sin, expunges it from reality, and brings healing to the world. If I made reality sicker by my sin, I just healed it with tshuva. And that's why it's maybe refuah la'olam. And that's the chesed of tshuva, that undoes, what you did. It's not just an issue of getting out of punishment. I'll drop, because, I want to, just tighten a few points. I don't want to get on a tangent, but I'll just allude to that's really the difference between our tshuva and the tshuva of the goyim. The tshuva of the goyim, like Ninveh, and this Tzaddik says this, and his Takanos Hashavim, but it's poshet. The goyim, they can't change reality with their tshuva, but they could get out of punishment, like Ninveh did. And for them, maybe their tshuva is just the good twin of Toyal Rishonos. But Am Yisrael, and I'll drop a hint to you, it's because we have Shabbos and they don't. And I'm not going to say more right now. I'll just give you a hint on the hint. Because Shabbos is connected to the 7th millennium, which ushers in the 8th. Right? Ten chelek l'shiva v'gam l'shmona. Shita v'shin havam v'chad choruv. And if you could survive the 7th millennium, which only Am Yisrael can, the Shomrei Shabbos, they can make it through that. You'll make it to the 8th, where everything is healed. We have Shabbos because we have Shabbos and they don't. That's why we have a type of tshuva that's a big chesed that they don't. And Shabbos is also called Matana Tov Yeshi B'Azkenazai Shabbos Shema. Shabbos also was a gift from God. And because we have Shabbos, and that's the secret when Kayin teaches Adam Arishan about tshuva, Pasach V'Amar Mizmor Shil Yom Shabbos. I know I dropped a lot of hints, but okay. But tshuva is refuah. It's refuah. It heals. And it's not just regret. And because you regret, you deserve to have your sentence suspended. It's not just regret. It's healing. And the fact that I could heal the disease I brought into the world, right? And maybe make that even come out ahead. That's the chesed. That's the chesed of tshuva, right? How it changes the world and expunges the chet from reality, right? Torah Rishnos does not expunge the goodness from reality; it just disconnects you from the goodness accomplished, right? That you don't deserve to be paid for it. But tshuva is oiker the chet in ganzen. Yeah. So the world is being healed, right, in these parshas, and that's what means Refuah Yisrael spiritually, that we're pushing you back against mortality, that the world now is getting a destiny of Shem Shamayim on earth, that it could aim at, and progress towards, right? L'man Sapir Shri B'Charetz is the reason for all the makas, right? That's spiritual energy, and that Shem Shamayim intensifies with the Torah coming to earth, that calls Torah Kula Shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Truma Tetzaveh becomes mamish manifest. Hamakam Hashem L'Shakin Shloshim Hamakam Asher Azkir Shmi of Shem Shamayim becomes manifest on earth, and now everything could aim at that Shem Shamayim. That's the beacon that you aim at to get out of mortality. Right? Before that, the world had no point center. They call it true north, but they call that because they're leftists. Made Safon Tipata Hara, and if Mizrach is Kedem, front, so Safon is left. The leftists like talking about true north because they want the mitzafon tipata hara, right? But we talk about center, point center. There's a way out of this. Point center is the escape route to a higher dimension, right? We have a way out, right? And now there's a destiny. The world is progressing towards Shem Shamayim. The world was without Shem Shamayim before Yetzias Mitzrayim. The process of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Mansur, which intensified, all the way up to Matan Torah, which put Torah on earth. That's a certain Shem Shamayim that's permanently on earth, that's irreversible. And then there's an additional level of it, which is Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Binyan Mishkan, which sadly that aspect of Shem Shamayim comes and goes. We're waiting for the day when it will be a permanent fixture, and that's when the world will really start evolving. Shem Shamayim to aim at, that gets us out of the mortality box. That's refuah. The world's being healed, right? So now so now we know, therefore, the time of Shovavim, these parshas, it's a time also for tshuva, right? It's like we explained. But it's also a time, not just tshuva in general, right? The world's doing tshuva. It's finding itself. It's getting back on track to progressing to where it's supposed to go. First getting back, tshuva, to be shoved to what Adam Rishon was before the sin, and then it's going to progress even higher to where Adam was supposed to take the world. Right? So the world is shoved. The world is getting back on track, right? And it's like it lost its direction. Now it's getting back on track. It's focused at Shem Shamayim. So that's tshuva, right? But there's tshuva and prayer. Speaking of bris milah, kayadua, what needs to be done during these weeks is tshuva for, p'gam bris, for not having kept the bris milah properly, right? Because the bris milah is to, keep the focus. That, of course, there's a time to go active, but only the Shem Shamayim, only focused at your kosher spouse at the time that she's muteris, and which it makes pruvu, and it only does good things, right? But that's where you keep the focus. Everything's l'shem shamayim, right? You're not distracted. You have that clear goal of l'shem shamayim. Kol ma'asecha yu l'shem shamayim, right? That's what bris milah is. It's so kol ma'asecha yu l'shem shamayim, right? You keep the focus, and that's how you focus at shem shamayim, and you break out of mortality, right? In a world without shem shamayim, there is no breaking out of mortality. There's also no goal, and there's no higher purpose, and nothing's going anywhere. Right, and then in these parshas, the world got its shem shamayim instilled, and shem shamayim is carried by Am Yisrael that's born in these parshas. Ushmeinu karasa b'shmecha, right? Atecha b'shimcha migam chezu goycha baretz. We carry God's name upon us. Ro kol mi'atz ki shem Hashem nikra alecha v'yarom imeka. We carry that name. We're the carriers of that name. We're the people that are the carriers of that name that give the world a destiny, give the world a purpose. It shouldn't be larik, it shouldn't be kerry. Right, that's why this result was we do for tikkun abris, mamish koach of bris milah. We do about tikkun abris to supplement if even right. And I'll drop you another hint for those who are in kisvei ari, right? That everything that's wrong with the world, right, comes from the shviras hakelim. And those kalim were yotze b'sod tipos keri. I'm not going to explain this, but I'm not going to explain this, in a way that the uninitiated may understand. But for those who are initiated, that that the shviras hakelim happened because they weren't focused on shem shamayim. Vayimlach vayamos. Every koch just wanted to be its own king, and that's why they died. And that's called keri mikra. No focus. I mean, being egocentric also means no focus. You have a focus outside of yourself to aim outside of yourself for shem shamayim. It's ani emloch. That's keri, right? That's no direction. You're not going anywhere. You're egocentric. The egocentric does not go anywhere. He's stuck with himself. He's stuck where he is. He's stuck with himself, right? So all those mulachim kadmoin the misu were yotze b'sod tipos keri. Right, and so all tikkun is also, in essence, a form of tshuva or a form of bris milah, which in these terms are interchangeable, and that's refuah. That's to heal the sickness, and ultimately, it's all to heal death itself, heal everything that's wrong with the world, and that's what's happening in these parshas. The world is finally breaking out of the alpayim tohu, formlessness, not going anywhere. Right, the others started a transition, but they only got promises, as we're going to read in Rashi in this upcoming parsha. Hashem only made them promises, but the world didn't actually change. They got the promises that the world will change. So technically, chronologically, Alpayim Torah starts with them because they got the promises. Right? But it actually happens in actuality with Yetzias, the kiyum, when the world starts changing. Nisim gluyim start happening, right? Start breaking out of the mortality, right? That the whole world order, which is mortality, which came because of Chet on Rishon, that is, what happens during these weeks of Shovavim, right? And your Shovavim Tat, and that's Tshuva, that's Tikkun Abris, and that's the real koach of Refuah. So should help that, this chos of what we said. She mamshech Refuah la'olam ubifrat la'isha cholanis. Get the name. The four Shem of Isha Cholanis, Chanasar Leah Bas Mמציא, Betושach Yisrael, and we should have, of course, have a group and a refuah for the whole world. Right, the world is sick, really sick. Right, we should have the refuah that comes with the Gula Shem of Beher B'Yameinu. Right. Thank you very much for listening to me.